Did Harvey Weinstein just get off on a technicality? Sort of, but it's a little more complicated than that. You know, more than 100 women had made accusations against him over time that he abused his power as one of Hollywood's most influential movie producers, that he traded work opportunities for sex, preying on aspiring actresses, and that when they said no, he'd resort to blackmail or just force them to have sex.
Harvey Weinstein is on trial for rape based on Jessica Mann's allegations. Through sobs, Mann told the jury, "I said no again, and he said, I don't have time for games, and he ripped my pants."
He was found guilty in that case of first-degree criminal sexual assault and third-degree rape. But New York's highest court has just decided that trial was unfair, that glaring mistakes were made. Basically, that both the prosecution and the court screwed up.
We knew that Harvey Weinstein did not get a fair trial.
And so, Weinstein's conviction in New York City now goes away. Let me explain where it all went wrong. As momentous for the Me Too movement Harvey Weinstein's conviction was, you should understand that even at the time, legal experts worried that the case was on shaky ground.
I mean, so this feels like a shocking decision, but this was always a tough case legally in New York.
From the very start, there were legal experts who saw a big flaw in the prosecution's case, that while the allegations were graphic and grotesque, the victims they came from had complicated relationships with Weinstein. We heard accusations that Weinstein lunged at one victim. She tried to resist, but he kissed and fondled her, despite how she kicked and pushed to get away before forcing himself on her orally. We heard from another victim. He grabbed her hand and forced her to undress. He got on top and had intercourse with her. A third victim detailed how she was shoved on the bed, punching and kicking, but she was raped and couldn't resist any longer because he had her hands locked. But all three women had, over different periods, an ongoing relationship with Weinstein. Two of them continued to have sex with Weinstein, consensually, for years after the alleged sexual assaults. They wrote to Weinstein saying that they loved him, and this formed the backbone of Weinstein's defense, that this was all consensual. Now, the complainants argued they did all of this out of fear. Harvey Weinstein was a powerful man.
Mann told the court she never meant what she wrote, saying nice things only because she was afraid of the producer.
But this is a messy case to make, and the prosecution decided to take a chance. Let's gamble by breaking one of the fundamental rules of a fair trial. So this rule that the prosecution broke dates back more than 100 years to the story of a man named Roland Molyneux. He apparently had some kind of feud going with another guy. His name's not important. What is important is that he was accused of mailing him a bottle of poison powder, hoping to kill him. That poison actually ended up killing someone else. Again, it's not important who. But during Molyneux's first-degree murder trial, the prosecution tried to introduce as evidence this idea that Molyneux killed yet another guy the exact same way earlier on. And they used that as proof that this is just what this guy does. He kills people, so he's guilty. There's a basic rule in New York State criminal law that you can't call witnesses to the stand who allege other crimes that the defendant may have committed as a way of saying, so you see, this is a scumbag who's capable of committing the crime that he's actually charged with. But that's exactly what the prosecution did with Harvey Weinstein. They had three other witnesses testify that he sexually assaulted them, even though their allegations were completely separate from this trial. They weren't even allegations that led to criminal charges.
Wednesday, prosecutors called two former waitresses to the stand, hoping to use their words to show he's a predator. Both of the women today were crying from the stand, all of their tears just laid out right there in front of the jury. You could see some of the jurors visibly reacting to all of that.
The appeal court decided the accused has a right to be held to account only for the crime charged, and thus allegations of prior bad acts may not be admitted against them for the sole purpose of establishing their propensity for criminality. Translation, stick to the alleged crime at hand. You can't prove Weinstein broke the law by accusing him of breaking it some other time. This is where, according to New York's highest court, both the prosecution and the judge went wrong.
Here, the court said, we're going to get back to what Molyneux really is. It's designed to avoid wrongful convictions.
You have to make sure you're not violating his right to be held accountable only for the crime with which he was charged. And that's not what happened here, according to the court.
But it goes even beyond this. The Court of Appeals said the prosecution made all of this worse when they asked the judge to allow them to cross-examine Weinstein himself about these other allegations that had nothing to do with this trial. That could have been devastating to Weinstein's defense. I mean, just imagine. He's up there answering for very specific crimes involving 3 very specific women, but it all gets muddied up and mixed in with a whole series of other accusations against him that have the effect of painting him as a generally evil person. Is that fair? In the end, Harvey Weinstein chose not to testify in his own defense, and New York's Court of Appeals seemed to suggest in its overturning of his conviction, who could blame him? The deck was stacked against him. Now you might be asking, didn't anyone realize the prosecution was breaking a fundamental precedent here? And how could the court have allowed it to go ahead in the first place if it was so wrong? Well, the prosecution knew what it was doing. At the time, it argued it should be an exception to the rule, because if the crux of Weinstein's defense was that all of the sex was consensual, they needed to demonstrate again and again that to him, consent meant nothing. They argued he showed a pattern of this kind of predatory behavior, and that helps dismantle his defense and show intent.
I think in the fervor or in the excitement to just do everything they can to bring the best case possible, they felt, let's just get a conviction.
But the Molyneux rule is not brushed aside so easily.
It is a high bar, and I think this is the Court of Appeals, the highest court in New York, pushing back and reminding everyone that it is a very high bar and it's not to be used routinely.
The general rule in criminal court is to ensure as fair an outcome as possible, that you have to be very careful about introducing evidence that doesn't directly prove the crime you're alleging. And if the purpose of that evidence is really just to smear the defendant, to make the jury loathe him, believe that he is not only capable of evil acts, but must do them all the time, that, this most recent decision says, cannot be allowed. So, where do we go from here?
Manhattan prosecutors said that they are going to do everything they can to retry the case.
They can bring Mr. Weinstein back to New York and have the case put back on the calendar and bring the witnesses back and they would try a very different case without those other witnesses. There's a lot of different ways it could go from here.
Either way, an important part of this story is that Weinstein's conviction being overturned does not mean he suddenly becomes a free man. He was also convicted more recently of raping and sexually assaulting a different actress. That verdict was delivered in LA, and he was sentenced to 16 years in prison for that crime. However, Weinstein's lawyers said today they plan to appeal that case now as well, because they don't think they got a fair trial there.